The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the host and co-chair of this webinar. My name is Karen Mann, and my co-chair for webinar is Sadita, who wasn't able to make it today, but we have our division chair, Brooks, with us. We represent the Human Development and Leadership Division of the American Society for Quality. This is a global division aiming to enrich the personal and professional lives of our members and non-members across the global community. We continuously look for new speakers within the range of our body of knowledge, which can be found in MyASQ HD&L community site. We host monthly webinars. If you are interested or you know someone that is interested, we would be happy to review their application. Before we begin the webinar, let me go over some webinar rules. If there is any question or comment, please type under question tab, and we will answer the questions end of our webinar. The webinar will be held for 45 minutes, and then we have Q&A timing for 15 minutes. Those who attend for 40 minutes minimum will receive 0.1 CEU through an email which you can save and use to claim the credit for ASQ. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the topic for my ASQ training, so we're so delightful to introduce to you Daniel Hopwood, who is continuing on a topic that would help you learning a little bit more on the same topic. I have Brooks, who is going to introduce you to Dan and read his bio. Dan, Brooks, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to introduce Dan because I consider him a friend and a very important person. Dan has been in the safety field for, it says 40 years. I can't believe that because he seems so youthful compared to myself. But Dan is the author of a very important book in the safety field called Workplace Safety, a guide for small and medium-sized companies. It was written initially in 2006, and it's still very active. I'm sure it's been revised a number of times, but it's a first-rate book. Dan has been in the American Society for Safety Professionals for about 40 years, and he has held a number of important positions there, president of our local chapter and regional vice president. He's currently an assistant regional vice president. I heard this presentation about a month ago when he spoke to our local chapter, and I was very impressed with how thoughtful it was, how well organized it was, how clear it was. And I thought it was, we're in the process of beginning a mentoring program in HD&L, and I thought it would be very, very useful. And Dan was generous enough to agree to make this presentation. So Dan, I thank you in advance, and I'm sure everybody will thank you when you're done. And the floor is now yours, or whatever substrate we're in.
Okay. Well, thank you. I want to thank Brooks very, very much for his kind comments. And for those listening, I do have a glass of water here. Excuse my voice. For the last couple of weeks, it's been trying to leave me. Some people would say that's a good thing, but I'll take a couple of sips here and there and try to keep it going. And my thanks to Brooks, not only for his comments, but for his friendship and leadership in both of the fields of quality and safety, and to Karen and Sadita for their help in getting this program up and running for the ASQ. I'm really happy to be here and happy to spend a little bit of time. And I'll tell you that the presentation is the topic of mentorship for all of us is really not something new. You are embarking upon a mentor program or reinvigorating one. Most organizations that I've been in association with have had mentor programs, but over time for me, what I've seen and what I've experienced is that the mentorship program seemed to be unidirectional. It seemed to go one way from the mentor down to the mentee. And my sense was that in my experiences as a mentor, and I've been blessed to serve in that role many times, that I often received as much benefit from the process as the mentee did. Now, there's no question that as a mentor, we have a particular role. I'm going to use a couple of terms today that I think are important. One is a covenant. The other is sort of the formality of the process. And we'll go through those things. And the first part of this presentation really is background. The second half of it is the phase process that I talk about. You'll see some words through this one. ASSP is the safety society that Brooks and I belong to. PSJ is a journal for our association. And you'll see those from time to time. And that was really the core of how I originated this presentation. But the application is 100% ASQ. There's no question about that. And so I start with this, and what invigorated me a little bit was this topic of mentorship was showing up all over the place, not only in the safety world, but business in general. And it seems like it's hit kind of a new cycle, and that clearly is the case for the ASQ. But Justin Malaznik in this PSJ, which is the PSJ AS, is sort of a part of our journal. He was interviewed, and he's an up-and-comer. He's a really bright young guy, and he's going to be a shining star in the safety field. But he talks about the fact that you can't go back and tell yourselves what you've already learned. So it's hard to be your own mentor. It's why mentorship, the process of mentoring someone, is so important. And he says that it's important for people to seek a tenured mentor early on. Now, I want to say something very early in this presentation, that seeking a mentor early on does not necessarily imply that we always have to seek a mentor as a young person. There's great value in that. We should encourage people to do that. But seeking a tenured mentor, or someone who can be that play that formal role for you, does not mean you have to be a young person. It can be a job reentry. It can be a job change. You know, we see a lot of folks coming out of the military who are clearly mature folks and clearly capable of doing a lot of things. But to change jobs and careers, finding a mentor is very valuable to them. So early on has more to do with where you are in the process of learning, where you are in the process of trying to find a career or a job, or to change one, than it is about your age. So I think regardless of how old we may be, being a mentor is important, but also being a mentee can be important. So thank you for that. We, like you, the American Society of Safety Professionals, formalizes this process of mentorships across the country, and well, actually across the world. We have about almost 40,000 members around the globe, and maybe 36 or 7,000 of them are here in the United States, and in a variety of capacities. But you know, there's no question that this topic of mentorship is critical to everyone right now for a lot of different reasons. I think change, I think progression, I think technology. I think some of us who have been doing things for a long, long time wonder if we ought to be trying new things, and that sort of gets us back into the learning mode and the inquisitive mode, and finding someone who can guide us is important. The questions that I think are important to kind of set the stage is whether or not mentoring is a formal or an informal process. You'll find in a minute that I have some thoughts about that. The literature has some thoughts about that. You know, it's also important to ask the questions: is mentorship active or passive, or is it ad hoc? This question of ad hoc mentoring, and a lot of people say that. You'll hear folks say, so-and-so is my mentor. And I think they truly believe, in the case that someone once in a while has provided them great advice, that they have been a mentor, and perhaps they have. I'm not going to question that part. But this ad hoc nature of the formality of mentorship, those two things might be a little bit in opposition, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And again, what we just talked about, and you might see my cursor now, I'm not sure, is whether mentoring is focused only on those entering a field early versus entering a field or changing jobs or something at a later point. So this is Tom Kramer. He's a guy who's well up in the organization of ASSP. And he and another gentleman, Dustin Hickey, wrote this article in the Professional Safety Journal in October of last year. And in it, they talk about mentorship sort of embedded within a larger article. And you'll see that they have said that informal mentorship for professional development has its downfalls. And I totally agree with that. I think that informal mentorship once in a while can send folks in the wrong direction. It can give them some thoughts. It can provide them, I think, some sense that things are good. Being that person who can help someone down a path is really important, but I don't know that always meets the true definition of mentorship. And that's kind of where I'll take part of today's discussion. Clearly, in Hickey and Kramer's article, they believe that the informality of mentorship has some complications, and I will talk about those in a minute. So let me take it from this perspective. Informal mentor relationships have their downfalls. And so part of that has to do with the tendencies of where mentorships come from, kind of what they mean, what they're focused on, and how they kind of roll up to the person. So the tendencies that I have seen are that, I guess maybe at least successful mentorship programs tend to be more formal than less. And of course, the question has to be why. It might be diligence. It might be relationships. It might be that there is something formal going on. Something is being measured, and all the things that perhaps in the quality world you're really fixed on in terms of making sure that what you say is going to happen really happens. I think there's a relationship there. The tendency that I've seen for good in successful mentorship programs is that they are more active than passive. That there are times to meet, there are times to do things, there are responsibilities for both parties. And again, you'll see that my sense is that the formality of a mentorship program diminishes that ad hoc characteristic. Although I do want to say, and you'll see it there, that ad hoc stuff may be a bridging activity. So you may have some formality going on and some really structured things happening in your relationship. And there may be some ad hoc things that happen in between that serve as a bridge between the two. I think that's totally appropriate. I think it totally makes sense. But again, I say that the tendency, I think our tendency in the world, now Brooks is right. I've been in the safety world since well, really if you count college, since the mid 70s, but professionally since 1979. And I can tell you that the vast majority of you on this call are not my age, but more importantly, when I got out of college and went to work, there were these formal programs. They seem to have gone away for a time, and for years actually, and now they're sort of coming back. But the definition of mentorship is not relegated only to new entrants or younger people by any stretch of the word. And I'm really happy to see that in a lot of different ways. So we go back to Hickey and Kramer's article when they kind of talk more about this formality. And you'll see some critical words here. And I think these are a couple that perhaps we should focus on just for a moment. That formal mentoring, you see planned, it's intentional, and more importantly, it's when two individuals enter into this agreement. And I actually, in a few minutes, will refer to this agreement as a covenant. And I think that's important, but we'll get there in a moment. So what's interesting in doing some background work on this is that we think of a mentor as that person who does some stuff with us. Well, mentor actually in Homer's Odyssey was a person. When Odysseus left on his 21-year journey, he left his son Telemachus in the care of a mentor whose name was Mentor. So that's where it comes from. This person's name was Mentor. And of course, Odysseus gave Mentor some very strict guidelines and a lot of formality. When my son comes back, he must be able to speak Greek. He must be able to read Latin, whatever the case may be. But that relationship was formal. And mentor was thought to be these things. He had to be nurturing, he had to be supporting, protecting, all the things you see on the slide. But the qualities of the person, the mentor themselves, so when you are embarking upon your mentorship program, the question becomes, are you a mentee or are you the mentor? If you're the mentor, then there should be an expectation of integrity, that you invest properly in the development of the relationship. And mentor, the person, did not really have an option if he wanted to be treated well when Odysseus came back from his journey. So, but you'll see a couple of words at the end, that there's a deep mutual affection and respect between the parties of a mentorship relationship. And I think that we often have experienced that for those of us who have been engaged in meaningful mentorship relationships. We develop lifelong friendships. We develop lifelong phone numbers that we can pick up and call and say, I need help, something's going on. And I think that the formality of that is immensely critical. And that's why I think that mentorship in and of itself needs to be more formal than less. Most descriptions that we see about mentorships deals with the functions of mentoring, not the overarching sort of dynamic. A mentor does these things, true enough. But I think that part of what we need to learn more about and to get better at is the larger dynamic of the value of mentorship, the formality of mentorship, why we should be doing it, and if you're going to be one, the recognition that it's not just doing stuff, I'll put that in quotes, stuff. It's working hard, excuse me for a moment, to try and make a difference in someone's life and career. So what's the definition? How do we come to grips with what a mentor is and sort of our current construct? Well, here's what we see as an experienced and trusted advisor. The word trust should mean a lot. Of course, the synonyms are many, but some that I pulled out, confidant, counselor, consultant, master, guru actually showed up in the synonym list, and we sort of know what a guru is. But you'll see that experienced and trusted advisor, I think, takes the cake for two reasons. They're one who can guide you in the direction and in the processes and in the field that you're interested in, or the topic or the need. All mentorship is not about technical development. All mentorship is not about becoming it's not all based on succession planning. It might be, but it also might be about how people interact in the world. I'm going to mentor you in sort of the discourse. I want to mentor you. And that's an old thing. That's an ancient thing. But I think we've lost a lot of that about how individuals interact in society and interact with people. So sometimes that piece is important as well. But you'll see these words come up from time to time. But I like the experienced and trusted advisors a lot. It's really critical to lay some groundwork and say that mentors are not yes men. In a generation where we sort of have this thing where everybody gets a trophy, where everybody's patted on the back and they're told what they do is meaningful and valid and valuable, without putting some parameters on that. I think almost everything, unless it has an ill intent, has some value, but you must tell people how much value. And we've sort of lost our way a little bit, I think, in the world about being honest with individuals. So it's important to recognize that mentors are not yes people. They're not there to tell someone, yeah, you're great, yeah, you're doing this, and yeah, you're going to be the best ever. I think there has to be that, back to this word, experienced, trusted, honest person that can make a difference in someone's lives. And I come back to this word intent because mentors need to be direct sometimes. Don't need to be rude, but sometimes being direct is important. But that directness needs to be clear to the mentee via its intent. So you have to explain the intention of your directness to someone. And as a guy who's managed lots and lots of people over the years, I can tell you that I've stubbed my toe on more than one occasion where I thought being direct with someone was absolutely the right thing to do, but I didn't clarify the intent ahead of time, at least not enough. And so what did they take it as? They took it more as an affront and as an attack, and that clearly was not my intention, but you can see that I think mentors need to have their intention very, very clear. So I talked about the formality of mentorship, and I think this is where, for me, in doing some study and background work, I changed the word a little bit. Most everything talks about relationships. Most everything talks about the formality of those relationships. I think in today's world that there needs to be a covenant between the mentor and mentee. I use the word covenant because it means a couple of different things. I think it strengthens the formality bond, and it more importantly defines for both parties clearly expectations and what outcomes should be. It doesn't mean that we have to be 100% successful. It does mean we need to be 100% honest. Every mentor relationship is not going to yield the exact result that you want, and that expectation is one that we should let go. We should always try. We should always endeavor to be the best we can. But if it doesn't go exactly right, the things you have to rely on then to make things okay is, was the covenant strong? Did we do everything we said we were going to do? And did we invest the effort and time that we said we would? And I think that in that regard, the covenant word to me has become much, much more important and critical. We might assume, for example, what some characteristics of mentors are, and I suspect you could add to this list. And so when you think about what does the person represent or look like that I want to be a mentor for me, what kind of characteristics would they have? This, I think there are 14 or 15 things here. These probably make total sense to you. I've highlighted a couple that I think are really important. The first one, the motivator, I think a mentor needs to be within the constructs of the covenant, capable of motivating the mentee. I don't know that always implies putting a key in the ignition, turning it on, and having someone go 100%. But progress, meaningful progress in direction, and motivating them toward that is critical. Empowering the person to learn, empowering your mentee to possibly fail and recover. I think these are critical attributes as well. I think a mentor has to be available, and that means two or three things. Needs to be available clearly from a time perspective, needs to be prepared, needs to be available from an emotional standpoint, and needs to be available for those calls at odd times going, I need help, or I don't understand, and I really could use some of your guidance here. And I don't know if it's more important, but I think it's an important one, this issue of perspective. That, for me, this means a couple of things. When you enter a mentoring relationship, the perspective should have fences. In other words, when you're working with someone, you need to know what goes into the fences that you're working on. And when you get together to go outside the fence, it does two things. It waters down your intention for what you're mentoring them on, and it takes time. And then you have to work on getting yourself back. So you always have to make sure that the perspective of the time you're spending with someone is critically focused. And if you're going to go outside that perspective, take a break and move outside, but come back in and know where you are. So we have the same dynamic for mentees. So you'll see the highlights that you probably could add to this list as well. They clearly need to be committed. If a mentee is not committed, they're not truly engaged, and they're not going to do what they need to do. I think mentees need to be honest. They need to be honest about where they are, what they want, what their intentions are, and where they need to go relative to accomplishing something. They too need to be available, and they too need to understand the perspective of what they're trying to accomplish. And where the relationship goes. So I hope those characteristics make some sense, but to me they were important to put out relative to understanding the relational dynamic. If we're successful, if we look at mentorship from perhaps its largest context, I think it should be transformational. We should be trying to take someone and move them from one place to another organically and transform who they are, not just move them on a timeline, but to transform organically who they are and what they're capable of doing. relative to the perspective of the relationship. And I think this is important. Penn State did some work on this, and if you look at relative to mentorship and leadership, you can see the categories on the left, in source of power, follower, time frame, rewards, and then they looked at the distinction between the transactional element and then compared that to the transformational. And I focused here on the transformational side for one reason. Look at the difference. Look at the difference in these compliance versus commitment, short-term versus long-term. I think these transactional things are important. Transactional things tend to be commoditized. And I think it's important in the mentoring relationship that we help someone get a better promotion or we help someone get a better evaluation. But more importantly, it's about their capabilities over the horizon. And I think those are transformational characteristics. And you'll see these here in the red column: character, competence, commitment. To me, these made so much more sense as to something to focus on in a mentoring relationship, that I just wanted to highlight that because, again, it's about, I think, transforming people as opposed to engaging in a transaction with them. So here's where we go relative to this process, and this is a process that I don't think that the words are that I guess I want to say that challenging. These are words inside a process that ought to make sense. But the phases of our relationships and the phases of mentoring probably, to me, came out to come into 4 quadrants. And for every quadrant of the mentee, there is a corresponding mentor focus loop. So as you look at this, the first quadrant has to do with mentees that are younger, newer, impressionable, and discovering. These, again, are some of the tendencies. I put newer in there specifically because not all initial mentoring relationships are with younger people. But I think the discovering piece and the impressionable piece probably is a characteristic that spans both of those individuals that might be in a mentoring relationship. You'll see here that I talk about the corresponding mentor focus loop dynamics are that for these younger, newer, impressionable, discovering folks, that the mentor focus ought to be on answering and supporting, encouraging, and defining things, answering questions, supporting the mentee in the process, encouraging them to be engaged and to do the things they said they would do, and to define where you're going, what the outcomes might be, and the kind of time frames that it really takes. So that is phase 1 in this phase model. And the second phase of the mentee deals heavily with where they are in the process. They're deciding, or they've decided about jobs or what they want to do. They're learning more about the job and where they're going and what they're doing. They're developing skills, they're developing interest, they're developing capabilities and characteristics, and perhaps they're an entrant into a job. In other words, they might be someone who's new in a task or new in a job. And that task versus job versus career thing is important, because the mentoring relationship can be inside an organization to move someone up, to work on succession planning. It's not always the external to the internal, meaning someone outside the firm that may be mentoring to come in. So the mentoring relationship can exist in many different realms, if you will. So that's kind of the second phase of the mentee, people that are deciding or decided about where they think they want to be. So what's the role of the mentor at this point? Well, they should be really engaged. They should be engaging. They're providing solid direction. In fact, this might be more focused direction. They're working hard to motivate, and they're helping to fix problems or fix issues or fix concerns. So you'll see that the distinction between phase 1 and phase 2, you'll see there's more activity and action on both parts of the mentoring relationship. I think that exists both from an action perspective, the things they're doing, as well as the sort of the developmental piece, more focused on the mentee in terms of their sort of thought processes and their mental capabilities to move forward. The third phase has to do, I think, with someone who clearly is engaged in a job, if you will. They're committed. They've been doing something. They understand it. They probably like it to some extent. They're capable. They've gotten some feedback that they're doing okay, or they can at least perform the task. They're focused on their job. They get it. And they're either experiencing things or they are experienced in their task, their job or their career, wherever it is that they're focusing. So you see the distinctions in the movement, if you will. In the mentee, you move from newer to learning to decided to experienced and capable. That's not a dynamic that's unfamiliar to any of us in terms of the career experiences that we've had. But I think by allocating some of these terminologies to it, it gives us a sense of where the relation focus, it becomes almost more, I would say, observational. It becomes more flexible. You're a resource. You're an assistant in terms of assisting people to accomplish things and get things done. Down here, you may be meeting very, very frequently. Over here, it may be less frequently. So there are check-ins. There are times when you just check in to see how people are doing. A good mentor will do that. That might be an ad hoc activity, but there ought to be some formality to it, like putting it in your calendar, doing something to remind you to talk to somebody. You observe. If you're in the same organization, that's a little bit easier to do than if you're not, but you can observe what the person's doing, where they're going, what they're engaged in. Are they doing the things that you have been working with them on? So the fourth phase clearly is that we've matured. As the mentee, we're experienced. We know our job. We know where we are. We know what our career is about. We're probably leading. We're mature both in our job and in our life. And we may be seeking some form of transition. And I started out with this, that many of us who have been sort of doing the same thing for 40 years might be interested in doing something different. I would be honest and say that I'm in that. I love my job. I love my career. I've loved what I've done, but I'm the kind of guy that likes a challenge. And so if I'm going to change, if I was really thinking about change, I think the first thing I would do is go find a mentor, go find somebody who could help me with that, even though I'm a mature guy. My gray hair bears that out. So for that mentee in sort of the fourth phase of their characteristics, what does it look like to be a mentor? You're now a sounding board. You're probably a friend in many cases. If you're not a friend, you're that wise old spirit, maybe old, maybe not, but that wise old spirit someone can always go to. I have a person that I've dealt with for 25 years is that she started off as a student of mine in the late 80s when I was teaching in a college. And here we are, I don't know, 30 years later. And she still refers to me as her teacher, which I take great pride in. But the other characteristics for the mentor in this part of the loop is that you're there to help resolve things and to help the person reflect back on where they are, where they've been, and what they've been engaged in. Now, what's interesting about this is that we see this, this should be moving. I don't know why it's not moving, but we tend to see this as a cycle. I look at it more as phases for a particular reason, and I'll show you that in a second. But I think these phases are really important from a couple of perspectives. We might have one foot here, we might have one foot there. That same thing here. We might have a foot in a couple of different phases as we migrate through them. So it's important to know where you are. It's important to know where the mentor is and where the mentee is. So I'm going to go through this just a little quicker, because if the circle worked, it would make more sense. But so we tend to go this way, but this ought to be going this direction, going clockwise versus counterclockwise. The reason for that is that we oftentimes find situationally that we might be, for example, as a mentee in phase 3, something happens in our life, an event, we move, company goes out of business, whatever it might be, and then we get kicked back a cycle or two. We get kicked back a phase or two. We need to understand that. We need to recognize it. And then we need to re-engage in that mentorship relationship. But we have to make sure we know where we are. The tendency, I think, is once we get to this phase, maybe phase 3 or 4, we think we're there forever. And the dynamic is in life, that's not really the case. We oftentimes, things happen and we get moved back. Again, company goes out of business, something doesn't go well, you decide to leave a firm. You want to take on some new academic endeavors, whatever the case may be. But the whole intention here is to recognize, and I'm sorry it was moving this morning, but we go this way originally, now we're going this direction. And it's because of dynamics in our life and in work, in our careers, that sort of move us back and forth into this phase. And knowing where we are is critical. And once you get here, you're not stuck here. I think having the flexibility and the honesty to say, I may have to move back is an important thing to think about. So let's keep moving here for a second. And so I hope that this phase process makes sense, that for each of the phases that a mentee is in, there's a corresponding phase in this outer loop for the mentor. And, these are the characteristics that I think you may add to these, of course, and you may have some different experiences. But I think that these things sort of go together relative to how they're related. Phase 1 to outer loop 1, phase 2 in the mentee characteristic to the outer loop in 2. I don't know that they're fixed. I don't think they're absolutely fixed, but I think they're meaningful. And again, the whole intention here is that you may move forward or backward in the process depending on things that have happened. So as we kind of move toward the conclusion now, I think it's important that we summarize 2 or 3 things that for the mentor that you can see what they must be capable of doing. They've got to be present, responsive, and consistent. I think in the absence of those 3 things, you don't have a mentoring relationship. You might have a relationship and you might get something good out of it, but I don't think it's a mentoring relationship. That mentor should provide path and goals. There should be some direction, some skill honing, and that the relationship and that mentor endures when time gets tough. That's why the issue of the covenant is so important. If you truly are engaged, if you truly want to help, if you're truly a mentor and you believe that the covenant exists, when things get rough, you won't bail. When things get rough, you won't alter your course. And I think that piece is pretty darn dynamic and pretty important. It's one thing to have an agreement. It's another thing to have a covenant. So clearly the mentor needs to align their phase with that of the mentee. You don't want to be out of phase. So look at it visually. If your mentee is here, you don't want to be over here. That might not be the best thing. I'm not saying you can't be friendly. I'm not saying you can't have a relationship. But if that's the sole source of what you're doing, then you're probably not headed in the right direction. The mentee, on the other hand, also has to honor the covenant. I think that sometimes mentoring relationships fail because the mentee just doesn't put the effort in. They don't put the work in. They don't do the things they're supposed to do. They might show up to a meeting, but they haven't invested the time, the energy, or the effort to make sure they're ready to go for the next meeting. I think they need to be honest. They need to be honest about what they've learned. They need to be honest about the role of the mentor and if they're really helping, and they need to have that conversation and be able to share with them whether or not the process is really, really helping, so that you can work things out. And they too need to understand what part of the phase they're in. You wouldn't want a mentee thinking they're in phase 3 when really they're still in phase 1, at least in this model. And when those two things get out of whack, they're out of phase, if you will, then I think some problems can exist. So I think this list, where mentoring helps the mentee, you could add to this list. I focus a lot. Ed Brooks and I had a recent discussion on things relative to decision making and leadership. But I think all of these these things have relevance when it comes to developing a mentoring relationship. And you probably could add many, many boxes to it. So please do. And when you think about it, you can make that a little bit more robust. So the next question, so this really is more focused on where the mentor helps the mentee or where the mentor interacts with the mentee. But the next question kind of goes the other direction. Does the mentee help the mentor? Is there anything in that relationship that helps the mentor? And I say absolutely. I think that it gives the mentor a chance to practice and validate. We're not looking at mentees as test subjects. That's not my intention. But it gives them the opportunity to practice what they know, to validate what they know, and to be honest about it and go, ooh, wait a minute, maybe I need to alter something here. Clearly they get engaged. I think it helps anytime you mentor someone. I totally believe that it helps your technical development or your development, your job and what you're doing and your capabilities. You're engaged, you're involved, you get to pay back for the time when you were a mentee. You get the great opportunity to role model. And I think for many people, there's just sort of this internal feeling that when you are a mentor, it just feels good to pitch in. It feels good to help. I mean, there's a great, I think a great positive sensation when you can look backwards and go, wow, I helped those people. There was something in our relationship that was meaningful to them. That makes most of us feel pretty good. So in the end, I think everyone benefits. But at some point, that mentee will become a mentor. And so that covenant, that relationship, that formality will do nothing more than to help them become a better mentor. So in this whole process, taking those sort of three words, the formality, the mentorship, and the relationship, you're going to make them better at this process when their time comes. And I think there's great value and great advantage to that. So thank you. And let me do a couple of things. I want to thank Brooks again for his very kind introduction, and to Karen and Sadita for helping to set this up and all of their efforts. And I want to apologize for my voice. I usually have the dulcimer tones of Tom Jones or somebody, but they've avoided me, abandoned me today. So I apologize for my voice. But I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to spend a little bit more time if anybody wants to talk about any of the things I've shared. And otherwise, I really have had a great time. I appreciate being here, and thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much, Dan. This has been very, very informative. Really, really good stuff. I would encourage all our participants to please type in your questions so that we can raise those questions for Dan. And meanwhile, Dan, I love that the loop system. It's amazing. It's a great tool, I would say, for the mentors, and also a great tool for the mentees to kind of follow through that really nice structure that you have.
Thank you.
Yes, I am just waiting. Give me 1 second. I just need to pull some questions here. Okay, so we have a question from Michael. Experts like to talk about how often professionals change careers during a lifetime. What effect does this have on the younger, newer mentors-mentees relationship that may or may not run a full circle next phase?
Oh, that's it. I think I understand the question, and it's a great question. Thank you, Michael. And I think what you're trying to tell me is that because there are those in today's world who are not afraid to change jobs, and some change jobs a lot, that you might not get through the entire process. I think I would agree with that might happen, and that you might be in phase 3 with someone when they decide to go somewhere else. I guess the challenge I would have is whether or not the mentoring relationship at that point needs to be abandoned. I think based on the covenant and relationship you have with the mentee, the answer might be no. And if it's no, then you can continue to work with them and help them in their next endeavor. I don't know that the mentoring, I say that, but I don't know the mentoring relationship has to last forever. but I've known a few that have, where people work together for a long, long time. Part of what I sense from the question, I think, hopefully I'm getting it, Michael, is that we make these great investments. We spend these times together, and somewhere in the middle of it, the process will break down because somebody leaves.
Yeah.
I think there we simply have to say, did we do everything we could do regardless of the phase we're in? And if we gave it 100%, then we should feel good about that.
Correct. And probably in some cases, if somebody really developed a great relationship and it was so beneficial and logistically it's possible, at times they may just continue remotely or
Yes.
still in person.
Yep. Yep.
So thank
I
you,
agree
Dan.
with that 100%.
Yeah. Dan, another question from Heather. Have you had a negative experience with mentoring? And if yes, how did you grow from it?
I think I could answer that two ways. As the mentor, I think clearly as a younger professional where I was asked to mentor, the things that I did weren't all specifically within the parameters of those fences that I talked about. In other words, the perspective of the mentoring relationship was not clear enough. And in that regard, the thing that happened was ultimately the boss said, well, I don't think you're taking this person the way they need to go. So your mentoring relationship is over, because it was done in the constructs of an organization. So in that case, I wasn't really clear with the person on what we were trying to accomplish. So as a mentor, that was not good. Now we made up for it in different ways, but it didn't really work. As a mentee, I can tell you on a couple of occasions where people have committed to working with me, they simply abandoned the process. They stopped being available. They stopped being engaged for whatever reason. And so it broke down, and whatever it was I was trying to learn and do did not take place. And again, that takes me back to why I think the covenant piece is so critical. When you have that real formal relationship, and maybe it goes back to the very first example I gave, maybe our relationship wasn't as formal as it needed to be, but I think that covenant, as opposed to a formal relationship, takes it that next step and makes it harder for people to break it and to move away, regardless of whether you're the mentor or the mentee.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Dan. Question from Sandy. Can you suggest a conversation starter when first approaching someone you want to ask to be a mentor outside of a formal mentoring program?
If it's a discovery phase, maybe something along the lines of, hi, I have this interest. I'm thinking about doing these things. Is this something you have experience in? Is this something that you've been engaged in before? Two things happen. One, the person says, no, I've never done that. And so then you get to question whether or not they're the right person to maybe even approach to be a mentor. The other part of it, the obverse of that is that they may say, yes, I'm very experienced in that. I have a lot of experience in it, and I really enjoy it. And then that might be an opening. So, I've done this before, not so much in the mentorship relationship, but in trying to find out if someone is the right person to talk to. I kind of take it a different direction. I'll go, I'm interested in learning about these things. Do you know anybody? Are you engaged in this? Is this something we could talk about? And then you find out whether or not, one, they want to participate, two, if they've got some skill set. And then it makes it a little bit more natural to move to the next phase, as opposed to hitting them off the top. Will you be my mentor? And then I think you can move into some organic questions about, have you ever helped a younger, newer entrant person in this regard? And if so, what challenges and successes have you had? Interview them a little bit, and they'll probably share that with you. And then again, that gives you an opportunity to do some discovery as to whether or not you want to approach them in a little bit more detail about being a possible mentor for you.
So Dan, you're suggesting like doing more like a general conversation where you're trying to, at times the questions could be that, what are your interests? And at times people will say, you know, some of these things are something that I'm interested in, or what are you thinking of doing in your future professional base? And they may give you a hint that can lead to more question that, are you considering at some point mentoring somebody? And so on and on, that would lead you to see if it's the right fit.
I think that's fair, and I think that's very well said. I guess for me to summarize that, it's about kind of developing this sort of, maybe at the beginning, less formal but organic approach, where you're actually discovering information about the person to help bridge the next question. And from that, you know, I think from that regard, you'll find some things out that help you move on to the harder question of, will you be a mentor?
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Question from Elena. She loved the point of view that you have and all the information that you have shared with us. Love the question here. How do you measure progress?
Well, I guess I would say to all the quality people, you can help me with that one. But I think there's probably 2 or 3 ways I would measure progress. I think one is that, you know, are you, at the very simplest measure, are you showing up when you should show up? Is the mentee doing the things you've asked them to do? And the third one would be, if they're showing up and they're doing the things they want to do, is there a quality component to the output? So if there's something they should be doing physical, is it done properly? If there's something they should be doing verbally or narratively, is that being done? Because you have to have something to provide some feedback on. So I would look at timeliness, I would look at engagement, I would look at the quality of the work, and perhaps a fourth is what kind of spans all of those in between your formal meetings. Is there any check-ins? Is there anything going on that says that there's ongoing interest and ongoing effort being put into the process?
And have you ever used like also to support like a timeline where once you're done with the discovery phase, you kind of put together, these are the things we'll do, and kind of check off the progress as time flies?
Yes, I think a timeline or a calendar is a great tool in this process, and it helps with that formality, and it helps to sort of put parameters around the covenant. We will do these things in these time frames. I think that's very important.
And it's a very great point for everyone and all our listeners to keep in mind, because a lot of time planning is done. We have all the right tools, right players, but if things are not measured and people are not held accountable, it can kind of fall at that spot. So the importance of measuring as quality people, I think we all should understand that piece.
Dan,
I totally agree with that. And that might be something that I strengthen in the presentation, that there has to be some sort of interim measurement as to not only progress, but the quality of the work that's being undertaken. So thank you for that.
Dan, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Brooks. Thanks.
This was even better than I expected. I wish I had heard this 50 years ago. I know you weren't ready to do it, but I spent much of my life in positions where being a mentor was called for, but I didn't really understand what a mentor was. And I did a lot of teaching, which isn't bad, but it's not mentoring. And I didn't understand the distinction. And this is really an excellent analysis. I think of so many situations in my life because I was well equipped to be a teacher, and I could have been a mentor and done a lot more, but I didn't know what to do. That's simple.
Yeah.
So
I think sometimes there's also a societal pressure. Sometimes being mentors, I think the world is asking us to be really, really careful for whatever reason in relationships. And I think that the formality and the covenant part helps to overcome that. But there's something out in the world that is asking us to be really careful in these more deep relationships, and I think it's worthy to think about, but not to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Yep.
So keeping a time in our mind, I'm going to quickly go through the next few questions that we have. We have really great questions. Question from Jaren, should you outline boundaries between the mentors and mentees before starting the process, or should it be less formal to encourage more open conversation?
I think that both have advantages. Let's go to the first one where the parameters are laid out ahead. That might be appropriate for that newer, the younger person who's just entering into something. You say, look, we're going to do these things, but as part of our relationship, this is the parameters. These are the fences we're going to work within, and that's what you need to do. Are you up for that? I see a place for that. I also see a great place for having that discussion you talk about, where someone comes in, maybe someone who's been around a little bit more mature. They have some thoughts about things where you say, look, we need to have parameters around what we're working on. What are you thinking about? And then you have a discussion. Okay, that's worked for me. It hasn't worked. And then you sort of modify it together, but you still lay out parameters. You lay out direction and timelines and those sorts of things, but you've done it together. I really think there's a place for both. I don't think it's a one or the other all the time.
Yeah. Another question from Gloria. How do you distinguish mentorship from sponsorship?
Well, to be a mentee, you might have a sponsor. So your boss may sponsor you as a mentee, and the mentor may be in a completely different part of the company. So I think the mentorship has a job to do. The sponsor's role is to connect or to, well, I think in this case, it's really to connect. You think about a sponsor, they make an investment in something, and you hope to get some benefit. In this case, the sponsor benefit might be that you see the growth and development of somebody that works with or for you. But that mentorship is if you think about a sports car driving event, the sponsor is the guy that puts his name on the car. The crew chief and the mechanics are the people that are helping to get things done. So they might be the mentors in this one. But I think that the distinction is who does the work versus who introduces and nurtures that person into the role as a mentee.
Thank you. We have a last question. I found a mentor not very up to date. How would you handle it?
If the question is about you have a mentor and they're not really up to date, I want to make sure I get this one right. If there's something that is not understood or they're not up to date, then you might, as the mentee, help drive the process of setting the parameters. This is where I want to go. This is how you can help me, right? Ask the question. If the answer is yes, I say, okay, how do we put markers on the ground? How do we put the parameters around what we're trying to accomplish? And so you try to lead that part of the conversation as the mentee, and then that might help them be a little more effective as the process runs.
And probably sooner the better?
I would say immediately. Don't get farther down the path, and then look back and go, heck, I wish we'd have done that.
Yeah. My last question for today is from Denholm Kendall. Is there a difference between a coach and a mentor?
I think a lot of coaches can be mentors. But as a guy who played lots and lots of athletics and football up to my little bit of my freshman year in college, I can tell you that most of my coaches were not mentors. They were tellers, they were drivers, they were teachers in the sense that, here's where you block, here's where you run, here's why. But they were not mentors necessarily about, how I'm going to move into my career and what the next phase of my life is. I don't think any of them were like that. I think all the coaches I had were great people. I don't remember a bad coach because of the time they invested. Now, they may have been a mentor to someone, but none of them were a mentor to me. By definition, I don't think a coach and a mentor is the same. And I think if we looked it up real quick, we would find different words for both of those. And coaches are structured about putting teams together in almost all cases. There are some individual sports and individual events and individual studies that coaches aren't just for sports, but we think of it that way. Whereas a mentor really is focused hopefully laser-like on an individual. Coaches tend to bring larger groups together.
Thank you, Dan.
I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan, for such a great input and the knowledge that you have shared. I think it's so well structured, and I can really personally just visualize the 4 blocks, and you're working or you're being mentored by someone to see that, okay, this is the cycle that you should kind of process through it, and to make the learning curve so successful, and also for the delivery side for the mentor. So, and also thank you for all the questions to our participants that have been raised. Today's presentation and recording will be posted on our My ASQ community as well as on YouTube channel sometime this week. Our next webinar will be on August the 6th, and the topic is leading and responding to a change. Actually, the speaker for that topic is myself. Registration can be done on My ASQ community. To get automatic notification on future webinars, you can follow our LinkedIn page or sign up for our newsletter through our website. We would highly appreciate that you fill a 1-minute survey that you will see once you try to log out, and a pop-up will come on your screen as soon as you close this webinar. For those who are attending over the phone call only, and thank you for a couple of people that also sent me a message while the webinar was going on, how they're driving, but they have the webinar going on their phone, and they wanted to make sure that they could see the slides and walk it through again. Yes, it will be posted on our ASQ community and on the YouTube for you to have a second look again. So you will receive a follow-up email within an hour. For those of you who attended at least 40 minutes, you will receive a separate email, and in addition to the follow-up email within this week, which you can use to claim your credit. Thank you for your time today, and thank you, Daniel. This was amazing, really, really knowledgeable. We learned a lot from you. We look forward to having you all in our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.